customers. Because you say, well, so what? But they're selling a different product. It's not a different product. It's a substitute product. They're going to try to get my customers to substitute their love of donuts for love of cinnamon buns. You see the point? And it's the same thing. It doesn't matter whether you're competing in the car industry, the appliance industry, the technology sector, the computer sector. It makes no difference. It's the same thing, okay? But we'll stay with the donuts because that's the easy way to understand this. So, the cinnamon bun guy is on the top. On the bottom, I've got threat of entry of new competitors. Who's that? That's the guy that wants to get into the donut business. Okay? Is that a threat to me? Yeah. It's a threat. Why is it a threat? Because he's going to join the middle circle, and now there's going to be more donuts with the same amount of customers. So now we're going to share more customers, which takes money away from me. Threat of new entry competitors. So you'll learn as you read through your material and as we get into later chapters that the people that are in the middle sometimes actually will work together. So I might call the guy up at the other end of the block, the other donut guy that competes against me, my competitor. And I said, hey, did you hear there's a guy trying to open a new donut shop? What do you think we can do to stop that, to put up a barrier? That's what they call it, a barrier, okay? What might we do? Okay? Well, we're already established, so maybe our strategy to keep the other guy out of the donut business, maybe together we work to lower our price. We'll lower our price so low that guy won't even be able to break through the barrier and compete. And there are other strategies you can come up with, okay? Make sense? Huh? That's right. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. That's very good philosophy. That's kind of a political statement. But you're right. It applies in business. No. Why is it? You're not doing anything. You're not doing anything illegal. Okay. You're saying, yeah. You're fixing prices. You're trying to develop a monopoly in the donut market. Only if there were very few suppliers. Yeah, you could have that. Like in Microsoft. Had that issue, and some other, where there are here's the answer to that. You only have that, number one, where you have laws in a country that forbid monopolies or price fixing, and where you only have very few competitors in an industry, and where it affects much more people. So, yeah, if they did that in the oil industry, for example, okay, everybody fixed their prices to keep new entrants out, which they do anyway. Somebody could come in and sue you for restriction of trade, all right? Hard case to prove, though. And at the donut level, I don't think anybody would bother. I mean, there's no law that says you can't do that, okay? You're just, you're agreeing to drop your prices to try to make it impossible for a new entrant to come into the market. In a capitalistic society, that's perfectly fair. Anything goes, as long as it's not outwardly illegal or ethically wrong, okay? But that's good. It's a fair question, okay? At the high end, yeah, you have to be careful about price fixing. But normally when companies do price fixing, it's not because they're dropping their prices, they're raising their prices. Everybody's agreeing that, okay, now for our telephone service, we're all going to charge this same high rate. But dropping your price, no, it's not really illegal. So, yes?
What about same owner opening same kind of business but under a different name? Like, for instance, we have LG and we have Hitachi.
Right.
So basically they're selling the same line of product but with different name so that they can have a bigger market share. So is it another type of strategy?
It's still a rivalry then among competing firms, but yeah, you could do that, sure. A lot of companies do that. Some companies that are very large yeah, sometimes they'll sell a much lower quality, lower price product under a different name, but they're actually, but they're actually part of their business. You see that a lot in appliances, okay? Like, I'm trying to think of something off the top of my head, but I can't. Or automobile manufacturers do that as well, okay? They'll sell a cheaper model car. I think Ford and Opel was an example years ago. I think Ford owned Opel at one time. So Ford sold the high-level quality products, and they opened Opel dealerships that were much lower quality, cheaper product, okay? And they were able to compete better without actually having their brand name attached, and that's what you're kind of saying, right? Getting into the competition. But basically, you're still in the middle. You're still rivalry among competing firms. It doesn't change that, okay? Yes, way in the back. Low? What was that? Yeah. Yeah. Oh, you mean to keep the competing, to compete the new firm out? You know what? If you can hold on, I have there's a slide coming up that has all the different barriers that can be used to keep people out of a market, okay? There's legal. Some companies, that's why some companies pay for certain political candidates election funds, because they want them to support legislation that's going to favor their business against competitors, okay? There's a lot of them, but I'll show you that. There's a slide coming up very soon that shows you what they call barriers to entry, it's called, and I'll show you that to you. There are other things besides price, obviously. Wow, it was a late echo in here. Obviously, someone recording me here. So, the other thing we want to look at is on the left and the right. We have bargaining power of suppliers and bargaining power of consumers. So, we already discussed, do suppliers have bargaining power? All right? A lot of people think, well, if a supplier is dependent upon selling their product to their customer, all right, do they have bargaining power? And oftentimes, no, and oftentimes they do. So if I'm a supplier and I'm selling the same supplies to my customers' competitors, I do have some bargaining power. Because if they're, we'll go back to chicken. If I'm Elaine Poultry and I'm selling X amount of kilos of poultry every month to KFC, but I'm also selling poultry to Popeyes every month, and I call up KFC and I said, you know what, I can only supply you with half an order this month because Popeyes bought all our excess, all right? And then KFC is going to say, well, how can you do that to me? I'm your preferred, customer. How do you expect me to run my business with only half an order of chicken? Isn't there anything you can do? Well, if you're willing to pay a little bit more, I could probably work something out, okay? Is that using leverage? Yeah, so suppliers do have bargaining power, okay? Particularly if they're, if they're the only supplier of a particular raw product, they have a lot of bargaining power. And so the company's strategy in the future may be identify additional suppliers. And a lot of companies do that. They start to realize, because, and again, not using the pestle analysis, but if you use a SWOT analysis and you look at your supplier who is considered external, is that an opportunity or a threat? It's a threat. And the threat needs to be addressed through a strategy. So how do we lessen that threat of a supplier, kind of holding our feet to the fire? We do it by having a strategy to identify an additional suppliers so that now we can gain more advantage, okay? So it's a chess game. Same thing on the customer side, bargaining power of customers or consumers. Do consumers have bargaining power? Absolutely. Usually, consumers have the strongest bargaining power in most cases. And what is a consumer's bargaining power? Whether they buy your product or not. The only time consumers don't have bargaining power is when you have a monopoly. Look in this country, for example, okay? If I don't like my internet and telephone service from Etisalat, do I really have a lot of choices? Do, and they're about just as bad. No, but you see my point. So a consumer, oh my God, the consumer, see, as soon as I say something about a government organization here, it's like strange things happen. You know, that happens to me on the phone. If I'm talking to somebody in the U.S. and I say something, well, all of a sudden the connection dies. And I think, who's listening? Who's recording? Okay? Is there a microphone in here? Huh? But I'm only using it as an example. So, for the most part, okay, yeah, consumers have a great deal of bargaining power, but not always. Because when you're dealing with a company, an organization that is a sole supplier or the convenient supplier to you, the consumer, you may not have as much leverage or bargaining power as you think you have. Most of the time you do, because I don't like your service, I'm going to go somewhere else. I don't like your product, I'll buy their product. So usually consumers have an ultimate of bargaining power. But not always, if you really think about it. I always think about, internet services, cable TV services. Even in the U.S. you find that. I mean, I have a home in Scottsdale, Arizona. There's one cable TV company there, okay? Cox Cable. And if you don't like their service, you don't have, there's no option. That's it. Because they own the lines. They're not going to allow you to find another provider and use their lines, okay? So there's a lot of issues with things like this. So from the company point of view, usually consumers maintain the power depending upon the product and depending upon how many competitors there are in that particular market. Some things, yes, and in some areas, no. Okay? Everybody got that? Yeah. Boy, I'm not going to talk about Etisalat anymore. See that? That's spooky. Okay? So, competition from substitutes. We'll run through these. Okay, I put in a little bit more detail, so when we talk about the Porter's Five Forces model, obviously the fact that I'm going to spend time on this, chances are you're going to get an essay question on this on your exam, okay, which we'll go over in week 4, so you know exactly what to study. But competition from substitutes. So a customer's perception of the value of a product or service can depend on the availability of substitute products. Absence of close substitutes for a product means customers are insensitive to price, okay? So if I'm looking for a particular house, all right, I'm in the real estate market, and I'm looking for a particular house, and I can't find there's only one house in the area that's up for sale, then there's not a lot of substitutes. So if there isn't a lot of substitutes for what I want, then I may be willing to pay a higher price. Okay? So, lack of substitutes, I may want to pay a higher price. Most substitutes enables customers to easily switch on the basis of differentiating factors, including price, such as, this is a good example of substitution, online bookstores versus regular bookshops, or what we call brick and mortar. Okay? Everybody familiar with brick and mortar versus online? Okay, so I want to make sure. So, if I go into Magruder's, is it Magruder's? Magruder's, right? Is it Magruder's or Magruder's? Huh? Oh, see, I knew that. In English, it's Magruder's, right? Okay, I go into Magruder's, and I'm looking for a particular book. And the book I'm looking for is, we'll say 120 dirhams, all right, for this book. I can also look where for that book. I can go online. I can look in Amazon. I can probably find a book cheaper. Yeah, I might have to pay the shipping charge, but I can still probably get a better deal on it, okay? So is Amazon a substitute? Yeah, it's a substitute shopping service. So some customers might decide, well, okay, so what are the advantages of buying at Magruder's versus Amazon? Well, other than price, okay, it's cheaper on Amazon. It's more convenient because all I can do, I can sit in my big easy chair at home, hit a button, put in my credit card information, off it goes. I never even have to get out of my chair for the next 2 weeks. The book will be delivered to my home. Very easy, okay? So it's easy. There's a lot of convenience with ordering a book online. So what's the advantages to the bookshop now? How does the bookshop compete against Amazon? They automatically can't compete on price. But what can they compete on?
You can get it at the same time.
Yeah, I can get it right away. I go down, I drive down, I pick it up, I got it, I come home, and there it is, okay? There's something else, though. I don't know if they have it here. In the U.S., when you go into a bookstore, okay, it's kind of an environmental experience, all right? You go into, it's kind of like a library. You go into the bookstore, and you walk through, and, they always have the people, oh, can I help you? And I hate that, because let me look, okay? Can I help you? So you have somebody to help you. Do you have somebody to help you on Amazon? No. You have to know what book you want. You have to know the Library of Congress number and all that. But when you go to a bookstore, you can get personal help. They can help you find the book you want. Now you find the book you want. What can you do now? I can go over and sit in a big easy chair over here, plop myself down, and I can kind of skim through the book, take my time, read a few pages, see if it's what I want, right? Also, and I don't know if they have it here, in the U.S., they usually have a coffee shop in the bookstore, in the bookshop. Sometimes like they'll team up with a Starbucks, for example. So now I can go over, get a cup of Starbucks coffee, sit myself in a nice easy chair. I could sit there for hours and read this book, okay? I can't do that online. So the idea is, that's really what you would consider what we call differentiation. The differentiation between, excuse me, buying it online, where you don't get the amenities, and going to a bookstore, okay? So the bookstore is nice because I can sit, I can have a cup of coffee, and relax, okay? So that's substitution of product, okay? It's a good descriptor of what we're talking about in Porter's Five Forces model, all right? So the more complex the product or service, the more difficult to determine the differentiation factors. Threat of entry. So now we got to worry about that new guy coming in. And I'm going to get back to that question from the back is going to come up here. Expanding companies are attracted to industries that can provide a very good ROI. What's ROI? Excuse me. Return on investment. So if I'm going to try to break into a new market or a new product, all right, the first thing I'm going to do from a strategic point of view, before I put resources into breaking into a product market, is what's the anticipated return on my investment? It's got to be good. If it's not good, then I'm throwing money away. The other thing is the barriers. There's that word. Are there low barriers to market entry? Or is that particular market overly competitive, or is it highly regulated? Okay? So there may be some markets that I may consider so overregulated. Telecommunications. I mean, when was the last time you saw a new telecommunications company come down the pike? Long time. Very highly regulated, very highly competitive, okay? And it's very difficult for somebody to have a new startup telecommunications company because of the initial capital investment versus the return on investment is not really good. And you're competing against well-established organizations that have phenomenal resources. Okay? If I wanted to open up a telecommunications company in the Emirates and compete against Etisalat, there's going to be a lot of barriers to my entry. One of them is going to be government regulation. Okay? So that's a threat of entry. Established organizations often try to create barriers to avoid the threat of new entrants. That's what we talked about. So, you have a new competitor trying to get in and break into the market. You have existing competitors basically trying to keep them out. And so what we call that are barriers. I'm putting up a barrier. And there's all different types of barriers that established industry incumbents means somebody that's in there already, all right? There are all kinds of barriers they can put up. We already talked about like lowest cost. We'll keep them out of the market by dropping our costs so low they're not going to be able to get in and compete. And there are others. And here they are. As promised, I told you they were going to come up. So you have capital requirements, economies of scale, cost advantages, product differentiation, access to distribution channels, government and legal barriers. So let's look at these briefly. If I'm a manufacturing company and I want to keep out competitors, the more manufacturing divisions that I have, the more efficiency I have, and the more ability to manufacture a particular product, the cheaper I can sell that product. That's what economy of scale is. I can manufacture more efficiently, and therefore I can sell it cheaper. That could be a barrier to somebody just breaking in because they're not going to be able to match the volume that I already have established. And if they can't match my volume and efficiency, then they can't compete against me price-wise. Does that make sense? So if I have 15 donut shops and I'm cranking donuts out, somebody that's trying to break in who can only manufacture a fraction of those donuts is no way going to be able to meet my efficiency of donut manufacture, sales network, and pricing. They can't do it. So they're going to say, you know what? That's pretty risky. This guy, this donut guy, Al's Donuts, is so strong, I don't think we can compete against him. So we're going to have to either go to a different place or look at a different industry. Okay? Make sense? Then you have absolute cost advantages. You know, some companies just have a cost advantage over anybody that tries to come into the market. And sometimes those cost advantages are because of almost monopolistic practice. Okay? They have cost advantages. Differentiation, the more features that I can build into my product, okay, the more features it has, the more difficult it is for a new entrant to come in and compete against me. Okay? I may have such advanced research and development capability that I can continue to increase the differentiation, the features, the different features of my product to attract a wide variety of customers. Nobody can compete against that. So we always have to look at resources. When we have R&D resources, our employee skill and abilities could be a resource. Those can also act as a power base to keep out competitors. Okay? So if somebody wants to compete against Apple, they probably can't in any way, shape, or form match Apple's research and development, technology, and so on. They probably can't match Apple's brand. Apple's logo, all right, is enough to blow you out of the water. Those are barriers. Those keep a lot of people out of the market, okay? Distribution channels is also, when I want to market and move my product around and sell it, okay, the company that has a good distribution centers, globally located, all right, are going to have a distinct advantage over someone coming into the market new, all right? When I worked for Tyco, the division we were involved in used to manufacture valves. And you say, well, gee, how much money is in valves? You'd be surprised. Because valves are used, different sizes valves, different gate valves, there's, all different types of valves that are used to move fluids, to move gases, and really to move solids, okay? Powders and so on. So valves are used all around the world. Now, when we used to sell all around the world, particularly oil and gas sector, we sold valves all over the place. And originally, they were all factory direct. So when Aramco needed a valve for a facility, they used to order it directly from Tyco's manufacturing plant. And then Tyco got very smart. As they expanded, and they wanted to be more competitive, and they wanted to keep other valve manufacturers out of the market, they used their leverage to set up distributorships on a global basis. So now, okay, their distribution of valves was faster than anybody else could possibly compete. And new entries into the market couldn't match that distribution center process that was already set up. So it was a barrier to keep other people from entering that market. Okay? Yeah. 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 Exactly. Now, is that monopoly? No. Setting up a good, solid distribution network is just good business. Good capitalist business. Government and legal barriers, that's another issue. You know, when the government basically works in what we call sometimes a partnership with a company or an organization, sometimes they give those organizations certain legal protections. Okay? This was done as an example, in the United States. When they set up the first, the telephone system in the U.S., they had to have telephone from coast to coast. The entire United States had to have a telephone system. Well, what the government did was they allowed AT&T, American Telephone and Telegraph, to basically have a legal monopoly. They were protected by the government. Why? Well, in the early days, you couldn't have competing telephone companies that were going to be using, different wiring, different systems. It would have been madness. So they had one system, one set of wiring that went coast to coast. There was no switching problem. Everything was controlled by one company, American Telephone and Telegraph. It was a monopoly. Could anybody break into that business? No. The government actually put up the barrier. They wouldn't allow a competitor to try to break in. So American Telephone and Telegraph was a huge, huge complex, and it was a monopoly. The railroad system in the U.S. was another one. There were no competing railroad systems because you couldn't afford, if you're going from the East Coast to the West Coast by railroad and you have 10 different railroad companies, all with different size track, how could you get how could you get a train from the East Coast to the West Coast? Okay? You'd have to keep switching trains every time you went to a different organization because the track might be different. So they allowed railroads to operate as a monopoly and so on. Okay? Now, over the years, those organizations became so big, they divested, okay, like AT&T. The government ordered a divestiture of AT&T, which now allowed new entrants to come into the telephone market, and some people say that was a good thing, and a lot of people say that, you know what, the telephone system has never been the same. Yes? Yeah. Yeah, and they still do. Yeah, they have to. Because you still have to have one organization that owns all the lines. Again, if you had different phone companies own different sections of lines, you'd have chaos in the communication industry. But you now have, excuse me, AT&T used to make all the telephones, not just the lines, all the telephones that you used to buy were AT&T phones. There was nobody else. Now, there are many, many, many different manufacturers of telephones. You have a lot of Japanese companies now who are selling telephones. Panasonic is a big one, okay? They're big in telephones. They're diversified, okay? So, yeah. So they broke it up, and they allowed individual telephone companies to come in. Yes, they have to use AT&T lines, but they can set up their own switching. They can set up their own telephone service, their own billing, and so on. Excuse me. So that originally, though, was a barrier. Government intervention can be a barrier. Also, retaliation can also be a barrier. Now, retaliation is basically when a main company retaliates against another company who's trying to enter their market. Now, when we say retaliation, does that mean that their CEO goes to the new company's CEO and punches him in the nose? what do? How do they retaliate? Yeah, that's probably the most common one. They reduce their prices. So, you're going to try to enter this market now? You're going to try to go after my customers? Well, here's what we're going to do. Business before you even get your business started. Okay? And oftentimes you used to see that in the United States that used to happen and it would result in what we called a price war. Okay? It was great for the consumer. Okay? Because, like, if you had competing gas stations, for example, one guy would open up a new gas station and his competitor would lower their price. So then he'd lower his. Eventually, one of them would get driven out of business. Usually, the new entrant would get driven out of business. So the consumers loved that because, hey, I'm buying gas for almost nothing. The problem is once the competitor died, then the prices went way up. Yeah, that's the downside to the consumer, okay? That's retaliation, okay? Capital requirements, of course, always a big one. I mean, we talk about capital. What are we talking about? Money, capital requirements. So, has anybody ever tried to open a business, or has anybody opened a business? So what does it take to open a business? Capital. It takes money, and it's not easy. Okay, so a lot of companies who are new entrants to a market, one of the barriers they have is that their competitors, okay, become so large, it would cost them so much money just to get an operation started, and the more money you put into a new operation, what is the element you have to be careful of? What's it called? Risk. That's it. The higher the risk, the higher the risk, the greater the barrier is. So, if I was going to try to open a new, a laptop computer company, I might have a heck of a time trying to come up with enough capital to compete against Sony, HP, Dell. I mean, it almost be impossible. Okay, I'd have to even, where would I get investors for something like that, and so on. Okay, I'm just using that as an example, okay? So all of those are basically your barriers to entry into a market. Everybody got that? Kind of, not the most exciting thing, but it's kind of interesting. We're doing on time. Oh, we're okay. So, rivalry between established competitors. That's the third leg of Porter's 5 Forces model. We're still on that, by the way. This is just the explanation of slides. Believe me, so you have a lot of material here. If I ask you a question on Porter's 5 Forces model, you got a lot of material to study, okay? And remember, most of the exam, if not all of the exam, is going to be from the slides. So rivalry between, so now we're looking at my rival donut competitor, okay? My rival, okay? So an industrial rival occurs because one or more organizations within an industry strive to improve its position. So my direct competitor is going to try to improve his position to get some of my customers. One of the things they use is the concentration ratio, the percentage of the market that's held by a selected number of the largest organizations. So if there are 10 donut shops in Abu Dhabi, okay, 3 of those donut shops, their concentration ratio is 75%. Between 3 donut shops, which means what? That means the other 7 are only at 25%. So they have a very low concentration ratio, whereas the 3 biggest have the highest concentration ratio. Do you need to know that for your exam? No, you don't. Okay. Market share? Yeah, you could compare that to market share, yes, because it's percentage of the market. They call it concentration ratio, yes. Market share. So you can compare it to donuts, or you can compare it to other industries. Yeah. Yeah. In other words, if we think of all the donut customers in Abu Dhabi is 100%. I'm not saying 100% of the population, but 100% of the people that eat donuts. That's 100%. 75% of that market is held by 3 donut companies in Abu Dhabi, and the remaining 7 companies only have to, they're sharing, if you will, the crumbs. That's concentration ratio. So what we're looking at there, when rivalries are looking at how much concentration ratio is shared and how much of that do I have versus my other 2 competitors. How much of that 75% is mine and how much of that 75% is theirs. And if there's a distinct disadvantage there, I'm going to say, you know what, I'm going to try to steal another 5 or 10%. Okay? That's rivalry. Okay? Excess capacity is the gap between production capacity and the demand for products and services. So unused capacity drives organizations to cut prices because they have to generate cash to pay staff, expenses, tax, and debt obligations. So what does that mean? If I'm competing against other donut firms, and they've gotten, they've kind of made some progress competing against me, all right? Where is my excess capacity? My excess capacity means I have 5 employees over here and 2 ovens or 2 donut, whatever they make, donut machines, excuse me, that are idle, that aren't in process. They're not working. Why? Because I don't have enough customers to sell those extra donuts to. So what do we call that? It's called excess capacity. It means I have capacity to make more, but I'm not using that capacity because I don't have the customer base to support it. Make sense? Same thing in any manufacturing company. When you hear a manufacturing company has excess capacity, it means they have space, they have employees, they have equipment to manufacture more product than they're making, but what they don't have or the output. They have the input, the raw material, they have the throughput, but they don't have the output. That's excess capacity. They don't have the demand. It's exactly right. It's exactly right. They don't have the demand. So I may have to drop my prices to get rid of what I have. And I may have to do that because I still have to pay that idle staff that's not working right now, or I'm finding other things for them to do. I have to pay them because it's very, and some people would say, well, you could lay them off. Well, yeah, but if my business picks up, it's really hard finding good donut makers. So I'd rather keep them on my payroll and pay them. And in order to generate enough money, I may have to lower my prices to sell more donuts, even at a lower rate, to keep everything going. Okay? Make sense? Yeah, you can't maintain that forever. That's correct. Eventually, if the business becomes so saturated with other donut manufacturers, saturated donuts doesn't sound very appetizing. But if it becomes so saturated, eventually I may have to basically reduce my business by laying off some staff and maybe selling off some of my equipment. Yes, eventually I may have to do that. That's a definite threat, okay? Also, barriers to exit. If I want to get out of the donut business because, it's just not going well with my competitors, I'm losing market share. I have too much excess capacity. If I'm losing market share, my excess capacity is increasing, meaning I have more idle workers, more equipment that's not being utilized. That's all expense for me. So eventually I might say, you know what? I think I'm just going to get out of the donut business completely. Then I have to, from a strategic point of view, I have to look at what's called barriers to exit. Costs associated with leaving the industry. So what kind of costs am I going to have? Well, I may have a 2-year lease that I'm only 1 year into. Is that a cost or a barrier to exit? Yeah, it means I still got to pay that year's lease. I have employees that I have to lay off. Is that a cost associated with that? Sure, I got to pay them benefits, separation pay, and a variety of other government-regulated expenses. And then I have all this equipment that I'm still paying off. So now I may have to try to sell it to try to recoup some of the money it's worth, pay off the debts, and I may still have too many debts after everything is liquidated, okay? So those are what we call costs associated with leaving an industry or a barrier to exit. So you have barriers to entry a business. You also can have barriers to getting out of a business. You say, you know what? It may actually cost me more money trying to get out of this business than trying to make a go of it. And a lot of people get stuck in that process, okay? It's kind of an interesting concept. Some rivalry among competitors. Again, we're in that section 3 of Porter's 5 Forces model. Number 1 is direct competition. A similar product, service, or value to your market. Okay, we're using donuts. Direct competition. Indirect competition is competition for markets with dissimilar products or services. A competition for markets with dissimilar product or services. So you may have a, excuse me. So you may have competitors who are going after your customers with dissimilar products. Now, we know substitute products is the guy trying to get your customers by selling cinnamon rolls, okay? Maybe the indirect competition with a dissimilar product is somebody that's opening up a lunch street. In the States, we used to call them luncheonettes. They're like a diner. Okay? Maybe they're trying to steal your customers, get them away from breakfast food, come to our place. Don't worry about breakfast food. Don't worry about the substitute cinnamon bun. Don't worry about the direct entry guy who's selling donuts. Forget about breakfast. Come and eat lunch with us. Okay? Dissimilar products. What do you want donuts and all that breakfast stuff for? Come to our place. We'll make you a hamburger for lunch. All right? So those are competitors for markets with dissimilar products or services. Potential competitors, of course, are the ability to overcome entry barriers and develop synergies in an industry. So potential competitors are the people that are trying to break into your market. And of course, the substitutes compete for the same customers, but offer different functionality. So one offers different products, the other offers different functionality. So there's different functionality between a donut and a cinnamon bun, but they're similar. Okay? But there's a dissimilar product feature between donuts, cinnamon buns, and lunch, hamburgers. Okay? You see the difference? I know it's a little, the best example I could come up with. Number 4 on Porter's 5 Forces is bargaining power of customers. So now we're going to look at the 2 other levels, customers and suppliers. So organizations have to deal with 2 types of markets. You have markets for outputs and markets for input. So market for output is selling goods or services to customers, distributors, customers, or other manufacturers. And customers influence depending upon the importance of products to them and their bargaining power. So, markets for inputs are purchasing raw materials, components, and financial and labor services. So, my customers are people I sell to, my finished product. Those are my outputs, okay? On the input side, I am also a customer of the people supplying me with raw materials, okay? So we have a customer on the input side, me, and we have a customer on the output side, the people I'm selling my product to. Now, a lot of companies are not direct sellers of a finished product. Some companies buy raw material, okay? They have a throughput, okay? They build value into some medium finished product, and then they sell that product to another customer or another company who then actually produces the finished product from what was done. I think they do that a lot in the aircraft industry, okay? So maybe I build motors, the motor for the airplane. So I get all of the motor parts from my input side. I'm their customer, all right? That's my inputs. I build the engine, and then I sell the engine to Boeing. Transactions, shopping, or negotiation costs, those are usually done between customer and supplier, or customer and manufacturing company. Posing a credible threat of backward integration, ability to produce a substitute for what they purchase. Backward integration, as an example, is when a company decides, you know what, rather than buying all this stuff from a supplier, why don't we just open our own supply shop, all right? A good example of this was Ford Motor Company. By the way, we'll get into this when we talk about vertical integration also. Backward integration. Ford Motor Company used to buy all of their auto glass for their cars from a company called LOF. I don't remember what LOF stands for, but it's called LOF. They bought all their glass from them. Also, every radio that went into a Ford automobile was purchased through a radio company